right, that's fantastic. Well, what is your fifth and final tip for us today?
Okay.
Sonia?
My final one kind of links to everything, and it is think about implementation. And I think as a research school, one of the really great documents that we use with our schools is the implementation document. And one of the things that sometimes schools are afraid to do is to say we can't take on any more. We're going to just work and embed what we've got and take it to the place where we all feel confident that this is working for us. I suppose the other end of that is don't be afraid to get rid of things that you've done in your school and they are no longer working. And often because we've spent money on something, we've invested in it heavily in terms of time. We know that it's not. I'm going to say Maths Whiz. Sorry, Maths Whiz, whoever created it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But it was great at the time, Craig.
Yeah.
But we got to a place where it didn't work anymore. And because we'd spent quite a lot of money on it, we were so reluctant. But as soon as we got rid of it, it was the best thing we ever did. So I think we've got to be confident enough for schools to say, this no longer works for us. There's research, there's other best bets. Let's move it forward. But also we need to be confident to say, let's just stop. We're not taking on any more initiatives.
Yeah.
Let's really embed this and make it work and be confident, because it is something that we can see potential in. Let's spend time getting it right instead of moving on too quickly.
This is interesting. So to take your first example, I mean, the first thing to say is I don't think Maths Whiz will be sponsoring this podcast anytime soon. So they're goners.
Good.
But the other thing, I see this a lot, this kind of sunk cost fallacy, right? You think you've put all this time and money in, so you're clinging onto it for dear life, and it's so hard. I mean, just in life generally, it's once you put time into something, it's hard to let go. So that's fascinating. I'm interested as well, when I visit schools, and particularly when I work with maths departments, they'll say, all right, so our focus this year is to improve retrieval, improve questioning, improve extended write, and there's about 5 or 6 of these things, and you just think this isn't happening.
It's not going to work.
So what has worked in the past for you? Is it kind of one big idea or 2 small? Where's the limit, Sonia, do you think?
We always say 2 big ideas and maybe an extra.
Right, okay.
And really just home into that, and even then be flexible. Even if you're a term in and those 2 big ideas, there's more potential in one than the other. Don't be afraid just to hold back, because the long-term benefits of being really clear about, as you said, 5 things across a year just will not work. Because as schools, we know, gosh, I don't know about you, last week, we had SATs, we had this, we had that, we had the other, we had 7 things happening at once, and you lose focus. And we did our briefing on Friday, and by the end of it, I said, oh my goodness, staff, I'm really sorry, there's too many things happening.
Yeah.
So, we have to be really clear and really mindful of our staff's well-being. And there's nothing worse and nothing that breaks staff well-being down when we're trying to do too much.
Yes.
And it's easily done, and I'm hands in the air. I've been guilty of it, still learning, still on my journey. But we've just got to be more mindful as leaders, that we don't overwhelm, and make sure that what we're moving forward are things that are really going to have impact for our children. Yeah.
Okay, this is interesting. Just a few more follow-up questions on this. So when you say kind of 2 big examples, 2 big initiatives for a year, can you give us a couple of examples of what they might be, Sonia? How big are we talking here?
And if we're looking at a particular subject area, for instance, it may be a subject area, you might be looking at reading, but we might be looking at fluency. So it might be just fluency that we're going to focus in on. We're going to focus in on how to train staff properly to deliver fluency as maybe an intervention. But we're also going to look at how we train staff to implement it back in the classroom. We're going to do some in-class observations for staff, and maybe do some in-the-moment support for staff. We're going to do some coaching around that. So really build it in and be clear about what we want as that end point. Where do we want staff to be at the end of the year? If we've said fluency is the thing, where do we want staff to be by the end of the year if it's linked to reading? Where do we want children to be? So it's about really being really clear at what is the professional development that's going to support that. And again, it's not changing it every week. There may be two or three big points of fluency training across the year, and then of course slotting in other things, but being really clear about what that looks like. So that PD, that professional development calendar, being really working for you, rather than just being a list filled with things that you've got to tick off. We've just got to be mindful of that. Yeah.
That's really it's fascinating, this. So just again, just a couple more follow-ups on this.
Yeah.
So again, so one error I've seen with in schools, as I say, is just overwhelming people with loads of things to do. The other thing that's quite interesting, I don't know if this is a secondary issue and perhaps secondary exclusive issue, I don't know, so I'll be interested to ask you. You often get a whole school initiative that doesn't quite work within each department. So maths is always the awkward subject here. You'll get something that's like, we're going to improve, one of our focuses is on extended writing or writing prompts or something like that. And the maths department always have to almost kind of shoehorn that in, whereas it'd be great if they could focus on like a math-specific thing, but it doesn't fit in with the whole school agenda. And I'm sure the same, could work the other way around. Something that works really well for math, the English teachers thinking, oh, for God's sake, I don't want this. Yeah. I'm guessing that's not as big an issue at primary because we're teaching all subjects. Would that be right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that is kind of secondary specific. And I think you've made a great point there around leaders who are not necessarily, fully conversant with what every subject areas need to do, being really mindful of what is that conversation that you're having with departments about what are the specific needs for our department. Because of course there's whole school things that you'll bring everybody together for, but more often than not you're doing more department meetings than whole school meetings. So of course you've got to be specific. But leaders have to have that overview and be very much guided by that strategic picture, but also by that departmental picture. So I think it's key. I think in primary, we are mindful that there are some key stage, phase specific things that we've got to think about. So we look at early years, and we look at, for instance, the way that early years are delivering their math sessions. We've got to be a little bit more mindful. But there's also some things like manipulatives, where we want everybody to be using that, and it's not a key stage one thing, and teachers need to be really clear. So we've got to do some whole school teaching about the importance of manipulatives in reception, but as well as in year 6. So it's just being really clear about what is that pathway. Yeah.
That's interesting. Last one for me, just an observation and a final question. So my observation is, I love the fact that you have planned in to keep these big ideas going across the year, because what you often see, schools go mental in September, and then by February, staff can't remember what the hell this big idea is, because they're not getting more training on it. So I like that planning in these kind of, I think you said 3 kind of big revisiting points throughout the year. That feels really important.
And I think what we've also done is link that to the professional development, so that we're moving those forward as part of, it's not some new things that you're going to do as part of your professional development. We've got this whole set of things that we do as part of PD. I think when we started to merge them, and I always have to hold my hand up, Craig, we've been on a journey. All these things are journeys. I'm talking about it as if it's fully embedded here. This is a journey, and it's whether or not schools are willing to take that journey. And I think when you fix your lens, as that wider lens on research and what the research is telling you, what the best bets are as a school, I think you're more open to changing things and aligning things and thinking about what's going to work, because the research is there, but we're also looking at our context as well.
That's great. And final question, and if you were launching 2 big ideas, what's the best way in your experience? Is it to launch them both at the start of the year and run them both throughout the year, or is it launch one, let's get a bit familiar with that, and then launch the second one? What tends to work best there?
We do a little bit of staggering, never, because September's always a little bit, teachers come back and that learning loss, we all have that. We always forget what we're supposed to be doing as teachers in September. So I think if you're just throwing everything at everybody in September, we kind of do a whole refresher against every subject, just reminding about key points. But then we have some big ideas then that we move forward at particular points. So launching off with one, and then launching off with a couple of other things. So
Got it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,